They were both considered political outsiders, and their disdain for bureaucracy made them popular among voters. But French President Emmanuel Macron does not see eye to eye with his US counterpart Donald Trump when it comes to economics. This is what he said in March about higher US tariffs on steel and aluminum.
Unilateral measures that are against international trade principles take the risk of nationalism in search of short-term solutions, which in my eyes are never good. In any case, I believe it is important in the context of the European Union to react quickly within the framework of the World Trade Organization and in a proportionate manner.
But Macron says he persuaded Trump to change his policy on Syria. Now he's on a 3-day trip to the US, where he wants to convince Trump not to slap new sanctions on Iran. Macron says there is no plan B for the nuclear deal, but many analysts believe he'll show more flexibility to win Trump over.
Emmanuel Macron is a young president who suddenly arrived on the international stage, where he wasn't very well known. And his ambition is not only to be present, but also to be visible on the international scene and to be able to exchange with its main figures. So there is a true appetite, which we saw on July 14th last year, when he welcomed Donald Trump with great pomp. A true appetite to establish privileged relations with everyone, and with Donald Trump in particular.
Many European companies like Airbus, Renault and Total have invested heavily in Iran, and French exports to the country have more than doubled since the easing of sanctions. So winning over the support of the White House will help French businesses. But Trump rarely heeds advice from other leaders. And getting him to listen will be a tough job, even for the Trump whisperer. Nafisa Latic, TRT World.
Let's get more on this now with Elena Casas, who joins us from Paris. Elena, great to have you again. Look, Macron and other European leaders are reportedly coordinating efforts to persuade Trump to ease sanctions on Russia, including against Russian aluminium producers. How have these sanctions affected European companies?
Well, European companies are concerned about steel and aluminium tariffs, not only on Russia, of course, but also the ones that the US wants to apply to Chinese producers, because they've been concerned for a long time about what the European Union and Macron calls steel dumping. That is to say, cheap steel, mostly from China, flooding the European market and pricing European producers out of the market. So that means that even if the US decides to continue the current exemption, which means that European countries aren't affected by those steel and aluminium tariffs that Trump announced a few weeks ago, if he does impose further sanctions, or rather continue the sanctions on China and Russia, what they're worried about is cheap metals from those countries flooding the European market and making things very difficult for producers here.
OK, let's talk about Iran for a second. Macron is also taking the European lead in trying to get the Trump administration to rescue the Iran nuclear deal, or rather to not scrap it. How is that playing out amongst the French public?
Well, the Iran deal is widely seen as a really important diplomatic breakthrough that few people want to go back on. Many French companies, of course, some of France's biggest names, have bet extremely heavily on the opening up of the Iranian economy. Companies like Total, which has already sunk €5 million into an offshore gas field it wants to develop off the coast of Iran in consultation with the Iranian government. And Renault, for example, the car maker, has set up a factory jointly with an Iranian company in Iran, which is already turning out 150,000 cars a year. So these are serious investments that have been made by some of France's biggest corporations, and they are very much at risk if Donald Trump were to decide to reimpose those old sanctions on Iran, which of course meant that any companies dealing with Iran could then not deal with the US. So this could be a serious problem for some of France's biggest corporate names, and France has been heavily invested in the Iran deal from the start. French politicians were very much involved in brokering it, although of course this is before Macron's time, and it's something he's determined to save.
You mentioned those companies, very big French companies indeed. Very quickly, Elena, we're almost out of time, but what contingency plans have these companies put in place?
Well, Total, for example, says it's committed to that gas field off of Iran, even if new sanctions are imposed, and then it would ask for a waiver from the US government to continue exploiting it. But there's no guarantee, of course, that that waiver would be issued by any US government. And as for other companies, they already have problems investing in Iran because very few banks, certainly here in France, want to facilitate any cash transfer to Iran in case that means they fall foul of any future American sanctions.
Right, we're going to have to end it there, Elena Casas in Paris. Thank you so much.